Hi everyone. So you just finished your do now, and now we're going to start reading the story, which connects to all of those statements that you were just thinking about. So our goal for today is to read the realistic fiction story called The Perfects, which is also linked here on Schoology. And we're going to annotate. So remember, when we annotate, we're recording all of our thinking in the margins and thinking about the important literary elements as we read. And we want to just jot all of our thinking down so that when we go to look back at our story later, we can remember what we were thinking as we were reading. So you should have a copy of the story in front of you. You should have your reading notebook open to your glossary of literary terms. And you should also have out a pencil and a highlighter. And if you have any colored pencils that you wanted to use, that would be fine. Right? So as we go through this story, we want to think about any of these literary terms that might come up, like a conflict between the protagonist and someone else. We've mentioned dynamic character, someone who changes throughout the course of the story, etc., especially those unfamiliar terms. On today's lesson, I have a little annotation guide that you can use to help you if you're struggling with what to write. So, for example, you can circle all of the characters in the story, and in the margin you can write down if you think they're protagonist, antagonist, dynamic, static. You could even list character traits to describe them. For setting, you can box off any settings that you see in the story, so times, dates, places where the story takes place. You could write about what kind of mood or feeling the setting creates, if the setting is important, if it's creating conflict. And then moving on to conflict, remember that we have internal conflict, which is when the main character struggles against something within himself, or external conflicts, which could be like a character versus another character. So you can underline any major or minor conflicts, and you can annotate if you think they're internal or external. You could use your highlighter to highlight character motivation, so what the character wants to happen and why. And finally, towards the end of the story, you can put stars next to any lines that indicate how the conflicts were solved, if they were solved, okay? All right, so let's start looking at this realistic fiction story called The Perfects, and make sure your name is at the top, of course. All right, so I'm just going to start reading and annotating, and as I'm doing this, you can read and annotate with me. He was in his mom's painting studio, leaning against the Perfects wall and looking at the news on his phone. Suicide bombing, IED, insurgents. That's when Lindy started screaming, "Max, help, Max!" All right, so already we're getting some characters here, right? I'm circling all of them. So he was in his mom's painting studio. She's maybe this character here. And Lindy is another character who's screaming. And she's screaming Max for Max to help. So I'm going to guess that Max is the he here. I also know that based on the pronouns used, that this is a third person point of view. I'm going to have to continue reading to see which type of point of view this is, but if you're not sure, you can look back at your point of view notes. We know it's not first person because they're not using I. Okay, so I'm thinking maybe either Lindy or Max is the protagonist, the main character in the story, possibly. And we're also getting a little bit of a setting here, that mom is a painter and she has her own painting studio. I'm not really sure what this means, the perfects. And then there's this interesting line here that's italicized. So Max is looking at the news on his phone and it's saying suicide bombing, IED, insurgents. So based on our pre-reading, and maybe you even know some of these words, I'm just going to write down something to do with war with a question mark. It seems like he's looking at his phone and seeing on the news that maybe something bad happened, right? And then someone's screaming his name. So let's continue. Max didn't think. He just ran out the doorway, past the old wooden door that Mom had taken off its hinges because they squealed like something dying. That's a simile. Through the hallway, jumping over the place where the floorboards split, and you could see all the way through the kitchen to the kitchen below. Down the stairs, automatically skipping the broken ones, 5th from the top, 7th from the top, and 6th from the bottom, to where his little sister was standing outside the bathroom, ankle deep in water, screaming her head off. It wasn't my fault. The sink just fell over. I was just brushing my teeth and... All right, so I'm going to stop there. I felt like this house, I'm guessing, that Max is running through is... It's part of the setting, right? And I'm going to write, it seems like a very old house, almost like it's falling apart. And the sink just fell off. Okay, so that's down here. That could be a minor conflict, maybe. But it seems like Max and Lindy are maybe living in a very old house. All right, let's keep reading here. Oh, there was something I also circled here that I didn't say, but we learned that Lindy is Max's little sister. So Max is the big brother. Okay. All right, let's go to the next page here. Just read a little bit more. Max looked past Lindy into the bathroom. The old-fashioned porcelain sink, the one that Mom said had character, was lying on the floor, broken to pieces. In the wall where the sink had stood was a gaping hole, and water was everywhere, water pooling on the floor, water streaming in the hallway, a whole Niagara Falls of water spraying out of the wall, and a Pacific Ocean of tears pouring out of his sister. That settles it, Max thought. Today was an extremely bad day. All right, so I'm just going to write a little note up here that so far I know that the characters are Mom, because she's mentioned here that she loved this sink, Max, the big brother, and Lindy is the little sister. And now I'm just going to write Dad here because with a question mark. He hasn't been mentioned yet. Again, I'm feeling like maybe this mom loved this sink. Maybe this could be some kind of conflict between the kids and their mom. And here we get Max's internal thinking. So I'm definitely going to say that he is the protagonist of the story. And he's saying today is an extremely bad day. That settles it because the sink fell off. So I'm wondering here, what else happened that day? All right. So I'm putting my questions, my thoughts, all right, just kind of analyzing as I go through. I think we could read a little bit more here together, and then I'm going to stop reading, and you guys will continue. The house hadn't looked cursed online. It had looked, well, Max wouldn't have said it looked perfect, but it looked exactly like what Mom wanted, a big old Victorian house on a hill overlooking the ocean. So now we're learning that Max thinks the house maybe is cursed. Okay. And I noticed the word perfect, that he didn't think it looked perfect. That's the second time I'm seeing the word perfect in this story, and I know that the story is called The Perfects, so they're talking about the house not being perfect. I'm going to just pay attention to that. All right, Mom wanted a big old Victorian house overlooking an ocean. That's the setting again. It had room for Mom's painting studio and a garage where Dad, he's finally mentioned here, could have a workshop when he finished his final deployment and came home for good. All right, we definitely have to underline this because we know that this is one of our vocabulary words, right? We talked about deployment yesterday in class, and to be deployed means that you're stationed somewhere, and he came home for good. So I'm just going to go over here in the margin, and I'm making this a different color because I think that this is important. So we can write Max's dad is deployed for one last time. I'm guessing that means that he's been deployed a lot throughout Max's life. It says, there was a room for Lindy with built-in bookshelves where she could keep her dinosaur models and dinosaur books and dinosaur fossils, and a room for Max with a view of the storm-colored sea. Okay. It's a little bit of a fixer-upper, Mom had said, scrolling through the pictures with shining eyes. But that's perfect. We can work on it as a family. Okay, there's perfect again. Mom seems to think this old house is really perfect for them. And I'm also seeing that this is a flashback. So I want you guys to have your notes out because you can always refer back to these terms and just kind of remind yourself of what they mean. So the flashback is a scene in a story that occurred before the present time in the story. So we know that the present time is the sink breaking, and we're flashing back to when Mom was looking at the house online before they even bought it. She's saying we can work on it as a family. Max hadn't said what he was thinking. All right, so now we're going to learn a little bit about what he's thinking about this house before they bought it. That they hadn't done anything as a family for so long that he didn't know if they would remember how. Dad had been in the military since way before Max was born. He was used to living without Dad for months at a time when Dad was deployed overseas. He was used to moving to a new house in a new town in a new state without seeing it first and moving again a year later. I'm noticing, he was used to not making friends because it was easier to be alone than it was to say goodbye. Okay, we're getting a lot of information here about Max. So we know that Max moves a lot. We know that Max doesn't make an effort to make friends because we know that, well, he knows that it's not going to last because he's likely going to move. So we can use some, you can do a little characterization here that we can think that Max is feeling lonely or isolated, that he's kind of like almost given up on the idea of, having a normal life, all because, he's had his dad in the military for a really long time, okay? I'm going to make a prediction over here right now, and you guys can do the same thing. You can make your own prediction, but I'm going to predict that Max will maybe say something about wanting Dad home or not wanting to move. I'm curious to see what's going to happen because I know that they're already in this old house. They've already moved. So I guess we're going to flash back to the scene with the sink. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop since I already annotated with you quite a bit. All right. So I'm going to ask you for the rest of the period to finish page 2, which is kind of short. You're going to do page 3. Let's see how many pages this is. All right, it's 9 pages, so you can do half of this. You'll do page 3, 4, and I would say you can annotate till the end of 5, so you can stop here on the 10th. So this will be your homework, is to finish annotating down to the end of page 5, okay? And then tomorrow, when you come to class, we will continue reading the story and finish annotating. Let me know if you have any questions. You could always email me, okay? Best of luck and enjoy the story.